So you're going to have to plug that into the projector there. It's not going to. This setup here is wide for so that the zoom can go out to the screen. But if he wants to present, he's going to need a cable to plug in there. Whoever's running the PowerPoint. Okay, I don't have any cables for that. I've only got set up here. I don't have. This is. I don't know who's the tech guy for the venue. There's a plug here. So I've just plugged my system into there.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We will start shortly. Don't end your conversations just yet. We're about to start shortly. We're just fixing a small technical issue. know how. Elements, das. I'm not sure. I think it's at the back. I'm not sure. Yo. I can speak like this, Mas Marco. Once I put it closer. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I see Prof is being a grade 12 student and greeting me back. It's wonderful to be here today. It is our last Herald Community Dialogue. It has been a riveting series, and you have been the people to support this initiative throughout the year. Today we are discussing a topic I consider quite electrifying, as I think back to that match where only 1 point stood between New Zealand and what felt like the entire social cohesion of South Africa and South Africa and the win. I think back to Kobe crying in those last moments as that prop took that penalty. There's no denying the role that sports plays in our society as an agent of social cohesion. And I think we're reflecting on a moment that... Should I move closer, Marco?
Sorry, no, that's fine. It was me.
No problem. That can only be compared to the images I grew up seeing of Francois Pienaar flanked by President Mandela lifting up that cup. We know of the contributions of organizations such as SACOS to the debate surrounding race, sport, gender, and the different intersections of all of those issues. And today, we are here to discuss the Rugby World Cup as a global celebration of unity and diversity. The question we are posed with today is, how can the spectacle bridge divides and foster local and national harmony? I'm lucky enough to not have the responsibility of trying to tackle this topic myself. We have put together a fantastic panel to introduce them briefly as they come up. We have Dr. Paul Kairuki, who is the Executive Director Democracy at the Democracy Development Program. We have Professor Jolene Steyn-Kotzer, who is the Chief Research Specialist in Democracy and Citizenship at the Human Science Research Council. We have joining us online Thando Manana, who is Blue Bull's Executive Strategic Projects and who is Blue Bull's Executive in Strategic Projects and Women's Rugby. And lastly, we have Dr. Vuyani Boy, who is the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Museum in Tata. Can I ask our panelists to come up as we give them a warm round of applause? any seat. Any seat except for the green one. Green is my color today. The seating doesn't decide speaking order. I will decide who speaks first. All right, so we're pressed for time, so I don't want to spend too much time talking. So I'm going to go ahead and call upon our first speaker for today. And I'm going to ask Dr. Vuyani Boy to please come up. All right.
Thank you, Program Director, my colleagues, Prof, the Director of Conrad, and the members of community that are here, the Herald newspaper, and the elders that are here across the gender, and the youth, Bantwana Balapa. Well, my name is Vuyani Boy. I am the custodian of Nelson Mandela's legacy, one way or another. Chief Executive Officer of Nelson Mandela Museum in Mthatha. I have done lots of other things, just like my colleagues that are here. Prof, colleagues, elders that are here, and the traditional leadership, in particular the traditional leadership. If I was at home, I was going to say that, it's just that, how do I do it here? Amase. Amase. Yeah, it's only men from our side who are doing that, and then the women would have to sit down. With great respect, Chief. Colleagues, I have been requested to take my beautiful 10 minutes and talk about issues of unity, the victory of the sons of the soil in France, and how that victory can be sort of utilized and unpacked to ensure that at the end of the day we are having a united South Africa. And when I'm looking at my audience right now, I'm a little bit worried, Prof, because the element of, perhaps I should start there, the element of diversity that I've been waiting to see when I'm getting into this room, especially when we are going to talk about issues of unity. Seemingly it is scanty. I don't see it. Should I put it like that? What I see, it is what it is. It is what I see. But I want to believe, irrespective of that, whoever is here is a person who is striving by all means necessary to ensure that we are having what is called national unity, social cohesion. And I'm glad when I see the chief here, because I was here on the 14th and the 15th, where people were saying that, you know what, for too long, we have been excluded, one way or another. And I want to believe that today's sermon, I want to believe that today's seminar, I'm talking about another world of mine. I want to believe that today's seminar, it is really, Prof, about addressing those issues. You know, issues of social exclusion, political exclusion, Now, if I have to start, I would want to contextualize the whole question of Springboks victory and what are the implications of that victory to us as South Africans, and not only to us as South Africans, but to all people of the world. What are the implications of that? Perhaps at some point we need to forget about the impact of that victory, you know, to people of the world, but we need to say, what are the implications of that victory on South Africans? That is where our concentration and focus should be. What are the implications of that? And I want to start by saying South Africa experiences a deluge. I'm quoting William Gumede here. I quote, South Africa experiences a deluge of economic, social, and political crisis with largely incompetent, clueless, corrupt, dishonest, and deliberately divisive leadership at the helm of government. That is, I'm trying to frame my argument going forward, Prof. And I'm using, close quote, and I'm using the work of William Gumede, that we are in South Africa, the victory, whatever happened in Europe, in France, whatever efforts were made by a collective of young guys under a capable leadership and dishonest leadership. Sorry, capable and honest leadership. Don't quote that one, I was wrong. Honest leadership. I want to emphasize that. It actually happened at a time when we as the nation, that is the South African nation, we are experiencing serious problems, political, economic, and social problems. And these challenges have buried the national hope and replaced it with hatred, resentment, and despondency. And I'm saying that deliberately because you remember when the first time, was it 1995, when Springbok actually won the cup, what Mandela did, what Bishop Tutu said in 1994, and what Nelson Mandela did in 1995, whatever they did, it was a symbolic representation of the fact that South Africa, there is hope for the future of South Africa and for the next coming generation. And hence Bishop Tutu coined the 1994 as a rainbow nation, and with Nelson Mandela coming into the field, holding the cup, embracing the players, that was a great commitment and determination to the cause. And what was that cause? To unify South Africans across racial, cultural, and economic backgrounds. But now, 3 weeks back, the victory happened within a context when in South Africa we are faced with hatred, we are faced with despondency, and we are faced with resentment. And my argument is that at some point, such factors are being engineered somewhere, that we should continue going forward, not as a united nation at some point. And they presented South Africa nation with the complete obliteration of the rainbow nation. We are no longer talking about rainbow nation. We are no longer talking about unity in diversity, but we are talking about hatred. And it actually happened at a time when South Africa, since 1994, or for the past 29 years, you will agree with me, still facing the challenges of inequality, facing the challenges of unemployment and poverty. I want to believe, when I'm talking about the implications of the Springbok victory, for the ANC as the ruling party, the Springbok victory was a constant reminder of Mandela's and Tutu's values and vision that are replaced by political entitlement. And not only political entitlement, opulence and self-enrichment. So it actually happened at a time. Perhaps I want to be practical about this, not to be more theoretical. At a time that when you are not driving a new Mercedes-Benz, when you are not living in a 7 million house, you know all those challenges. Hence, I'm talking about opulence. So the values and the vision of Mandela and Tutu, I would want to argue that those values have been replaced by political entitlement. For the EFF, I want to believe that for the EFF, the Springbok victory was an opportunity to entrench political divisive ideologies and to remind South Africans about the once divisive emblem, Springboks. Yet Springbok's victory has broken their narrative with their empirical evidence of success. That's Nobuntu who's saying that. What I'm trying to say here, you'll remember, it should be 2 weeks back, Prof, when Malema was saying, come on, let's talk about the emblem. We don't want that emblem. We are not interested in divisive politics. We are not interested in divisive ideologies. All that we are looking, and in fact, I believe where I stand, that the issue which was controversial, which was looked as controversial about the Springboks, the issue of emblem, it was not an issue of the emblem, but it was the fact that the majority, historically speaking, the majority of South Africans were actually excluded from playing for the Springboks. For ordinary South Africans, the victory actually meant a short-lived unity, as they are still haunted by poverty, inequality, and unemployment. This means after parading, remember that they were going to all the cities, after parading, and after all the celebration of the Springbok victory, you will always go back to your house and be faced by the real realities where you don't have anything to put on the table. It was good. Because at some point, the whole parading, because at some point, the whole parading, it was so engineered to the point that it was serving a particular segment of the South African nation or the government. It was not coming really from what people are saying. But that is my argument, because you would go back to your house and be faced with poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Where's the unity? You can't have unity under those circumstances. Despite all these challenges that are threatening this Springbok unity, unity in diversity and social cohesion, the rugby team, they've made it. They're a beacon of hope. They're a source of our inspiration, common purpose. Let me be fast. But perhaps we need to look at this, colleagues, and everyone here in the house. Springboks have demonstrated few things that despite of all these challenges, they have managed to demonstrate these few things. That despite national divides, despite the fact that you are still looking at me as a colored and as a black African, because we are still having those challenges, those political constructed challenges, Prof, we still have an opportunity to deconstruct them and to collapse them, and perhaps using the victory of the Springbok to do that. They defeated the issue of the national divide. They defeated racism incidents. We know what happened, you know. They defeated political entitlement and nepotism, hatred, resentment, and despondency, dead and buried Rainbow Nation euphoria. And despite the obliterated values and vision of Nelson Mandela, my argument is that we can still build unity and using sport to do that. I'm a Springbok, I'm a Bokoboko. They actually showed us that bridges of peace and reconciliation can still be built. Build one undivided South Africa. So what lessons can we, there's no time up. So what lessons can we learn? If we want to build a united nation and prosperous nation, South African must emulate and amplify the Springbok leaders who led through honesty. Honesty is being transparent, listening to listening to others and delivering on promises. And delivering on promises. Honest leaders promote trust in themselves and among the team. Honest from leaders is at the heart of accountability, as honest leaders hold themselves accountable for their decisions, actions, and behavior. So these are my closing remarks, that unity and bridges of unity and peace and national harmony can only be built through trust, honesty, transparency, accountability, peace, and reconciliation. Not ubuxoki. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boy, for that reflection on the nobility of the Springbok cause. I don't want to say much. Luckily, it's not my job to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and call upon Prof. Steyn Kotze to come up for us.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming out to what I believe is a very important discussion. I must say I felt, although I'm very young at heart, I felt slightly older in other places when I realized the reference to the 1995 pictures. I was about 17 years old at that particular point in our history. So I think I'm going to build on Vuyani's, if I may, argument that, you know, we need to appreciate where the victory comes from, where we are at. And the context for me is extremely important. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of statistical details because that's what we as the Human Research Council do. We go out and we collect a lot of data. We measure public values, public perceptions, all of those key things on various topics, ranging from sport to democracy to perceptions of life satisfaction, to how positive or how negative people are feeling about their life circumstances. And as Vuyani rightly noted, we are regularly, we reach the title most unequal country in the world. Regularly. It's not something that tends to happen every now and again. It has been a reality that we have lived with on patterns of racialized poverty, racialized inequality, divisions, all of those issues that still permeate the lived realities of many, many South Africans. And I think for me, the key thing, of course, is that this victory came at a time where we went out in 2021, just after COVID, as we know, and we asked people, do you believe life will get better for you in the next 5 years? And approximately 40% of the population feels, and that is across the racial board, across age groups, across language, your various demographic. I don't like the word demographic because I feel they are barriers to human experience. 40% of the population feels that their lives will not necessarily get better within the next 5 years. So this medium-term outlook of South Africans is one generally of negativity, and we should be worried about that because this particular measure has remained consistent since 2003, and all of a sudden now we see a spike in the number of people feeling more negative about their personal life circumstances in the future over the next 5 years. And I think it goes further than that. It's not just your personal life circumstances, but also the opportunities you believe you will have. So, with the victory, for us, when we look at the Springbok victory, how it can be a celebration of unity and diversity, we have to appreciate the time at which it came. It came in a very difficult economic climate, a climate of hopelessness, of negativity. I'm sure we have all read and cried and shouted and put our fists in the air when we read the Zondo work, for example, that detailed the depth of corruption. But see, the thing is, and that's also something I've learned through, if I had to chronicle my research diaries to an extent, that's also something I've learned, is that South Africans have a very, very deep capacity to rally the nation. And it's interesting, the whole idea of rallying the nation, it generally is used during wartime. You know, where politicians and presidents, if you think of your Nelson Mandela's, for example, I'm thinking with the establishment of Umkhonto we Sizwe, rallying the nation around a common political goal, around something that needs to be achieved. And we have had pockets and moments of that throughout history. Most notably was this current Springbok victory in 1995 as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit, not necessarily about rugby right now, but about the days of COVID. We ran the COVID Democracy Survey in collaboration with the University of Johannesburg from April 2020, which was a month after lockdown started, all the way up until December 2021. And the one thing that I found so beautiful that actually can inspire hope around this idea of rallying the nation was we started looking at how South Africans came together at that point in time. We know the narrative, hashtag stay at home, right? Hashtag flatten the curve, hashtag all of those things. And I remember you saw pictures, whether it was a house or an informal building, closed, no visitors. So there was a lot of rallying around this crisis. And what we found was South Africans in general, and I'm prefacing my argument here, we are very suspicious of each other. We don't really trust each other. We are actually quite a suspicious nation. But when we are in crisis, and when we are in celebration, we become a little bit more trusting. So, in crisis, we trusted our political institutions a little bit more, specifically President Ramaphosa. His trust index skyrocketed during that time of crisis, so that also ties in with rallying the nation. But what was, for me, a surprising finding was as we started trusting our political institutions to deal with the COVID crisis, so too did our interpersonal trust in each other increase. So we were almost in this situation where we are in a crisis, We have to rely on our political institutions, and at the same time, I have to believe that Becky is going to do the right thing, and Becky has to believe that I'm going to do the right thing. And we believe that. But now you fast forward to the Rugby World Cup, for example, and you look at rallying around the nation, around a celebration. And I think that is possibly an area of exploration as to why it remains short-lived. It's because for a brief moment, we celebrate together, we come together, we rally together. But because our levels of trust still remain relatively low, we cannot necessarily sustain those momentums. And again, context matters. One cannot ignore levels of inequality, patterns of inequality, who still remains poor, marginalized, excluded, and without equality of opportunity. And again, that goes back to our political institutions, the architects of public policy, the architects of government, of deciding budgets on where money should be spent. We listen to the medium-term budget, and we should be concerned with the salary portion that is being spent on the budget that can actually go towards leveling a playing field for equality of opportunity in order to harness what South Africans, I believe, already have within themselves, and that is transcending divisions, transcending the lines that separate us in order to come together, whether it is in celebration or whether it is in fear. We have done that on both occasions. And I think I have saved you 39 seconds. I have saved her 39 seconds on her time.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you as well for your time saving, leaving more time for that riveting discussion at the end. And thank you for those thank you for those reflections on trust as something that we innately have as South Africans. The Q&A session is coming, so I hope you all have your notebooks and notepads out. Dr. Kariuki, over to you.
And I guess my 10 minutes starts now. Yeah. First of all, I want to acknowledge Professor Ngomezulu for inviting us from DDP, the Democracy Development Program based in Durban, in KwaZulu-Natal. And I'm really thankful for having been invited to come and share a few thoughts about this powerful conversation that CANRAD has put together. So we're celebrating this relationship and partnership together with CANRAD based from Durban. And I'm so much happy to be at home. Thank you, Prof, for inviting us. So I'm going to go straight into what my colleagues have already said. They've made my work easy. And you know, sometimes when you come last, you just summarize what they said, isn't it? But I would like to premise my conversation from here, from the point that just a week ago when Prof sent me the invitation, I was in France. And it just came at a time when I was just arriving for an engagement that I was invited there to go and do. And when Prof sent me this invitation, it was such a coincidence because I was facing the immigration. And the moment I told them I'm just flown in from South Africa, first of all, they stepped back. Looked at me like for 50 seconds and says, where's your ID? Immediately, I remembered what this country is about. They didn't see me as a person who has come for whatever reason in that country. At that time, I think they were still mellowing about that painful loss and probably the wrong color. And so when Prof sent me this, I'm thinking, did Prof knew I'm here? Because I was processing the reaction of the migration officers when I just said, they asked rudely, which flight did you come from? And they knew we just come from this one country. But immediately I started thinking about what Prof is asking me to come and share thoughts here and say,
The problem that we've experienced in sporting, even in our nation, is not just confined to our country. The reality is that the issues of confusion around who we represent as a people, our own identity as individuals, versus the human journey that we've gone as a country is a global phenomenon. So we must swallow that one and make peace with it. Because there's places where you go and you'll not be welcomed nicely. And that is the problem that we have carried through over time, as I premise my conversation, that even with this win, for the moment, it represented a detachment from our pain. And the confusion that is still lingering in this country, because at the moment we discovered we can forget about load shedding, we can forget about hunger, we can forget about floods, we can forget about lack of service delivery for a moment. And as soon as these guys went about parading the cup and celebrating them, same night, I remember, we got back to load shedding stage 4. So when we're talking about sport here in this country at the moment, it's at a very, very much superficial level. My colleagues have already mentioned about some of those challenges that I will not bore you with you. In fact, I had a presentation. I'm glad that it couldn't even go through now, because the things I was going to say perhaps are going to cause a lot of problems here. But I would like to premise my conversation to say, number one, is that we haven't traveled this journey so far enough as a country to fast track and appreciate that we cannot linger in the pains of the past and still seek to build a nation where every citizen is accepted irrespective of their socioeconomic conditions. Secondly, I premise that to say it's an unfinished political business that is still stifled by individuals and leaders who do not demonstrate the same patriotism that this nation presented when this cup was won. Just imagine with me for a moment the same patriotism that we see in the stadiums, people shouting, people forgetting their neighbors for once, and they're in this one moment, we got to win this because this is for our nation. How superficial that is, because immediately that moment of celebration is over, we immediately remind ourselves, who are we? So our identity as a nation is at stake. Our citizenship as a state is, as a nation is at stake. Just a week, I think, or two last week, we saw the National Minister of Home Affairs coming up with a white paper. I don't know how far much you include with that thing, but it just shows in one way, apart from talking about the immigrants, whom some of our sporting codes have majority of them in this country. Some of them are caught in the same pain of being racialized. There is a critical problem. And while we acknowledge that sports can create a possibility for us to build a nation that we want, we must also acknowledge that it's being confronted by difficulties of our political development as a nation. I conclude by saying this. The win by the Springbok was a loud call to action for our nation. That if we don't do what we need to do right now with some level of urgency, there is no Messiah that will fix our nation. We are the Messiahs. Thank you. I think I've saved you more minutes.
4 minutes, 12 seconds to be exact. I think I should have started with Dr. Kairuki. The competition of the time would have proceeded better. Thank you so much for that reflection. I'm so interested in this view of the Springboks win as a moment, just Jay, a moment where we got to see the potential of our country and what we can become. But we'll talk about that later. I want us to turn to the screen as we ask Utando Manana, I believe. Are you with us, Tando? Can you hear us?
Good evening.
Good evening, Tando. All right, over to you.
Yeah, I can hear. Thank you, Program Director. First and foremost, I think apologies that I couldn't join my colleagues today. as I was sitting in a board meeting earlier on, so me coming down would have been a huge hassle. But thanks to technology, I'm able to share alongside what they've just said. I think mine is just to put into perspective, maybe one thing that we have to just understand in terms of where we come from. I think the emblem Springbok has always been there. So many people associate the Springbok that it was predominantly for the Caucasians. I mean, if I take everyone back, that back in the days, you had the South African Rugby Board, you had the South African Rugby Federation, you had the South African Rugby Football Union, and also you had the non-racial body, which allowed all races to play, and predominantly games were played Denkreke and across the country, and that was the South African Rugby Union. So I think in terms of maybe that element of people not understanding the need that, our forefathers, my grandfathers played for the South African Rugby Union means a lot to the Black people, especially in the Eastern Cape, because we suck it out of our mothers' titties, if I may put, for a lack of a better word. So we grew up with the sport. And I think if one looks at over the years, with unity being forged and us coming and forming one body, which would be known as South African Rugby Union, in 1992, meaning that in a year or two would be announced in 1994 that will host the World Cup. Relatively new, as a new sort of amalgamated federations coming together. The notion started for me, understanding the game and reading about it, that we knew little about the game. I think that's not true. I think that myth, we should wash it immediately, because despite efforts to change the South African Rugby Union to the Leopards, as they were known, those were the African national players at the time, we managed, and we knew, and that is us coming through, that we also wanted not to take over the sport. And I think that's what we've seen from the likes of the Seers and all those that played before this young crop of pursuit of excellence players, that we always wanted to prove that we know the game. We've learned, from a very young age on what the game is and what it embodies. So I just wanted to maybe start there, and I understand that, rugby has the potential to heal divisions. And I think 1995, we might not have taken it seriously because we're such a young democracy. But as time went, 2007, we won it for the second time in France. But I think also what just became eminent at the time was the time where you had issues of quotas and players, how many Black players needed to be in the team and so forth. So that was the turbulent times, but I think the perseverance at that stage was just so much, where you had the first African to play for the Springboks, Owen Kumani, and we were just behind. We also sort of wanted to play. We had the Brayton Paulse, because we idolized Chester Williams, the late Chester Williams, in our playing days. But I think we always, myself, I always had the resilience to say that, this all men are born equal. It's always been my ethos and my something that I motivated myself, is that all men are equal. We all have two hands, 10 fingers, 2 feet, and I think it just needed on how much you work on. And I'm quite happy that we celebrated, despite the trophy tour not coming to, the home province, or rather the hometown of Sia and Stick and so forth. But I bought into the notion that, there's just so much that these players can do, and we just have to celebrate, because we cannot control the world around us, but what we can control is our attitude. And I really want to thank the South African people because I think for the South African people, they embodied that, the diversity and the unity that we seek to speak about today. It meant a lot. It meant a lot. It meant, one, the perspective. And I mean, when you give people the cause, they will look for ways to bring cause to life through their perspective. And what I mean by this is very simple, is if you have one race sitting in one room, you get one perspective. So you get one perspective. But if you have a diverse group of people, magic happens. And when magic happens, there's a lot of shared values, shared vision, which seeks to unite, inspire through extraordinary rugby experiences. So I know that earlier on you could hear I'm not a political person. I see myself in the sport fraternity, so I want to stay there. But also I think as South Africans, we've now won the cup 4 times, but not all is rosy, because if you look at the school sports, it's still something that is a big hustle. It's a lot of turbulence if you talk about it, because there's a lot of blame game. So, we need to make sure that how do we get the next crop? What's the pathway to make sure that when we go to 2027, we see the new Sias, the new Colbys, Ken and Moody Lucky will be there, but injury permitting, obviously. But for me, is that the players that we had over the last 6 years, since Rassie took over, have actually showed what other coaches previously lacked. And they lacked the belief, the trust that was spoken earlier on by one of the speakers. And I think unity is something that still needs to be built upon. But what I'm quite happy is that the citizen want to unite. There's a sense of belonging and pride now in 2023. And I think we see, even with the previous Model C schools, that predominantly we see, a lot of diverse group within the team, and they buy into the school's cultures. And now there's the Guijo. I mean, if you look at schools like Queens, in Queenstown, Selborne, Grey, Pearson, and everything, is that we see that now this is certainly a reality, but it's just how we, just keep on motivating. What's the purpose? What's the vision of us as young leaders, young administrators, to make sure that you guys can keep on celebrating, but we look back as far as speaking directly to South Africans and really asking ourselves, how best can we build the bridge through rugby to make sure that our young ones, when we're no longer here, we know that we still remain one of the top rugby countries, that play. We are well respected now amongst the world. I think we've had a superstar born from Zweden, Siya Kolisi, who's shown, that, nothing is going to stop him from becoming what he is. And rightfully so, one of the only 2 players to have won back-to-back. So for me, it sort of, as a former player, it's just to always, understand that respect, unity, integrity, and the friendship. That's what, that's what held us together. That's what, others fell by the wayside. I mean, others don't want to see the game. But I think if we're going to talk on a lot of these issues, we've got to look at, ourselves and see how best are we making sure that we're moving forward and we're seeing a lot of things. So for me, just in closing from my side, is that the Boks showed the greatest effort and gave it their all, and that would not have been possible had they not all bought into the coach's philosophy. Unity was shared right there in those team rooms, and sport breaks or continues to break all barriers in the world. And if you share love for the sport, we all share the same bond. And therefore, if your mind can believe it, your body can achieve it. And I think that's what we've learned from the Springboks and how important it was, that we now become, for the 4th time winners. We need to continuously understand that, integrity, sport teaches us through to us being, yourself, or being yourself and being true to yourself. And the pursuit of excellence was just something amazing. And I think we owe it to, to everyone, for our kids and for those coming through, that we've got to have the tough conversations. I think not once because we've done the trophy tour, but we've just continuously have to keep a time check and see what opportunities keep on arising and if they are fair enough. Because if they are not fair, then we're not moving in the right direction. So therefore, I think from my side is, it's all that I would like to add, in this first stanza is that, the sport continues to keep us glued as South Africans. I think it's the only thing in the last 6 years is that we're known as the world champs. It's the only sport that we are known as the world champs. How best can we sort of capitalize in that? Not financially, but I think also humanly. How best can we sort of be true to one another, be true to your neighbor, be true to your kids, your neighbor's kids, and so forth, so that we foster that strong bond that will always keep us as champions. And I think South Africa, the heritage is there because we've played the game, coloreds, whites, and black people, we've all played, but it's just that we've got to find the synergy. And SA has a huge heritage in sport, and it's great that rugby is not only seen in the Eastern Cape nowadays, not in the Western Cape, but however, it has grown in leaps and bounds across the length and breadth of this country up until Limpopo, as well as you have the Limpopo Blues and the Northern Cape. So I think in essence from me, once again, is that we need to make sure that we have a lot of people in one group so that we can create that magic and also make sure that it happens realistically, so that we make sure that these players, they are professionals. I mean, they earn big monies. So everyone looks to them because they are mentors. But then the mentors need to stick so that the youngsters can look up to them and we can have a unified South Africa. Thank you very much.
All right, hearing directly from a sportsman's mouth. It's a fantastic gift. Thank you for those reflections, Thando. I've been tasked with having a conversation with our speakers. We are now in the section where we are in conversation with Clarks. So I'm going to be, delivering my own reflections and asking my own questions in this section of the program. I'm just foregrounding because I don't want to be accused of manipulating the Q&A time. This is not the Q&A time, it's still coming. I'm quite interested, as I said previously, in this idea of the moment. And I think back to the moment when we finally won that game, the relief, it felt like everything was well with the world. The relief after it had been so long of just being 1 point behind. And quite practically, a practical example of this moment as just a moment. I don't know how many white people I hugged in that moment. Like, I hugged so many white people I had never met before. I had the pleasure of watching at a community spot in my neighborhood. And so, Dr. Kairuki, you speak about this moment, and you provide your own reflections about its fleeting nature because of your own experiences going through now immigrations and that realization that the moment has passed, in fact, which I think is something in different ways we all came to grapple with in our own lives. And so I'm interested in what it is we need to do to make this moment a daily reality. What do we need to do to make this moment a daily reality? I'm just going to get a mic. There we go.
Thank you so much. That's the part I didn't finish in my presentation because of time. And I think it's very important we ask that question, because if we have a common sense about this project is that it was just for that moment to celebrate a win, we'll be missing the big picture. So what can we do? Very quickly. One, we must not be complacent that the political project has not finished. The political project is to deal with the issues of the past that have kept us divided, that were mentioned here in this room before, the issues of race, the issues of inequalities, the issues of underdevelopment, corruption, all those things that keep on hurting our hard-won democracy. So I refer that as an unfinished business. And if we become complacent and allow this moment just to slip away, we will quickly again go back to our default setting. You're black, I'm white, you're colored, and all those other things that we have. So the first thing is we must not be complacent. Secondly, we must now recognize that this win is a call to action. What am I doing in my space where I am to build a nation or co-create a space where every person is fully accepted for who they are, given an opportunity to release their and maximize their potential, and be able to create a possibility that can make every other person around them fulfilled. It cannot surely be a responsibility for one person or for a few of them or even government alone. It must be for all of us. So what am I doing with my space where I am to continue this unfinished business? And thirdly, it's that when we're talking about unity and social cohesion, and I want to say this respectfully, it's not just replacing white folks with black faces. It's dismantling the institutional structures that have become part of our system that reminds us that we are divided. We have to do that, and we have to do that courageously. Why I think these kind of dialogues are important, because they make us go to the uncomfortable spaces and confront those things that we feel very hard to talk about, but we are not going to move forward until we confront them. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Doc. I'm going to cross over to Tando, and I'm interested in your reflection on sport. You know, now that Tando's not showing up on the screen, I'm thrown off. I'm worried he can't hear us. Is he there? All right, sure. I'm interested on your reflection of sport as a vehicle for unity and the need for us to foster more diversity within sport. However, we know that there are also contestations within the sporting fraternity. And I think one of the major contestations is that it remains a fraternity. We saw during the Women's World Cup conversations about banyana, pay disparities, so on and so forth. So what do you think are some of the things within the sporting fraternity that needs to be done to address questions of diversity? Because there exist contestations even within the space being a beacon of hope for us.
Maybe I'll try and answer in two folds. I mean, you've brought in the women, so that would be something I'd start with first. I think we all know that women in the past were always seen to be those in the kitchen and taking kids to school, taking lunches to their husbands, and so forth to their grannies. But the world changes. If one look at England, for example, when women's rugby started, it started as if it would be something that would just fall apart or just sort of evaporate into the thin air. But it kept on growing, and them growing the game has meant that this year, most of their players are fully professional. And by being professional, it means that they can actually earn a living, and they're also on linear television. So it's been progress to them, because predominantly rugby is seen to be a men's sport, but rugby has been played by the female for the longest time. So what we're doing here in Pretoria is that we became the first professional, the first union to turn amateur women's rugby to professional. So we've given the ladies contracts because it's a living. So they fully committed to the program, high performance program. They train the same time as their men counterparts. They eat the same diets. When they travel, everything is the same. But what I will say is it's not level when it comes to the remuneration. Fair so because of there's not a lot of corporate that are still pumping money, but what the Bulls are currently doing is that, and thanks to the BBCO board, is that they're matching each and every facet in terms of using the same change room, same place to go to. But if you go around the country, it's not the same because it's not taken seriously. So if you look, if we want to drive and be true to what we want to do in terms of the diversity we speak about, is we've got to make sure we keep on pushing the boundaries and try and level the playing fields football, women's football. It's the biggest thing in England. You know, it's bigger than the PSL, for example. And that's how big it is. It's just a normal. That's how they operate. So what I'm trying to say is there's few people that are holding it back and not really releasing. And by the time they want to release it, it would be a bit too late, a couple of years too late. And I think we're not learning from past mistakes or past experiences, and they catching up with us so we're sort of chasing what is happening around the world. And I think from a South African context, it's very important is that if corporate don't really see the bigger picture, we're always going to talk about inequalities, especially between men and female. And funny enough, some of the big top corporates executive are female, and I think I would expect that they would buy into the women's program because they understand what women went through and what they go through, and I think it just becomes worried. But I think on the other side, because you have a lot of conservative men from their side as well, they don't see themselves pumping money into women's sport, but rather would want to focus on the men's rugby form. But the biggest growing sport is women's sport it can be football, it can be rugby. It's bigger than the men's cricket, it's bigger than the men's rugby. And that for me is the fundamental, is that if you want to level the playing fields, yes, we understand corporately the female cannot earn as the same as their male counterpart. But what are we doing to make sure that they get to that level? Because yes, there is money, there is corporate, there's money to spend. I mean, it had to take up to the Motsipe Foundation to come in aid for SAFA to pay the players. It's not supposed to be if you are really a proper administrator who's got an interest on what you are running on a day-to-day basis, instead of other people who are not, it's not their business. Their business is not to save you, but to make sure that you're running the processes. So I think from a rugby perspective, SARU has taken the initiative where they've put now women's rugby as the second biggest sport in their portfolio behind the Springboks. And remember, in the past, it was right at the bottom. So pressure is coming from international bodies. And I think also, if you look at also the men, is that they need to also buy in to say, we've got to go and watch these female and promote the game because they also come to our games. So it's a sort of a hand washes the other hand approach. But I mean, diversity across rugby merely was seen as a white man's sport. It's not that. It's just that people keep on asking for those opportunities. And I think now we know that everyone has got the potential. If you just have the right mix, results will come on its own. And therefore, from a corporate side, we'll see that big corporates will keep on pumping if the results are there. But also they've got to understand that the pathway needs to be looked after so that the program doesn't become dormant if, sort of certain players leave. For example, if you look at the men, we know that the Seers will stop playing rugby eventually, but you know that there's a lot of them coming behind that will feel those sports with ease because the pathway for men has been very good. So for women, it needs a lot of money being pumped into so that you continue to make sure that you are trying to level the playing fields. Diversity is there, unity is there, but also I think from just a support is what the sports need in terms of the rugby perspective. I'm not sure about the other sports, but I think fans and the game and the community think everything is well, but we know that there's still some imbalances going forward.
Thank you so much, Shando. A round of applause. Prof. Steyn, you spoke on trust as something that we innately have as South Africans of each other. And the idea of rallying the nation. I don't know how many of us are actually rugby watchers, but I'm not a rugby watcher at all. But that day, I was. I was glued to my screen. And it felt like there had sort of been a clarion call for everyone in the country to, we see on social media the skits on Elizabeth and all of those, all of that commentary happening, just reflecting our response to this clarion call for us to rally behind our national team. And I'm interested in how we can go about transcending division through trust, right? And what we can do to make this trust something that we are able to constantly harness in our spaces. Because I think because of the divisions between us, we enter spaces with a lot of distrust of one another. We are quick to want to rally with people we experience some kind of sameness with. So I wonder how we can make that trust something that we are constantly, a constant reality for ourselves.
Thank you so much. I was kind of, when you started calling my name, looking at the door, thinking, right, sure I can make it, Thando, in 0.5 seconds, maybe, out the door. And that is a big question. And I think for me, just the whole notion of trust, and as I mentioned, what our research has shown, if you trust your institutions, and by institutions I mean you trust your government, you trust the IEC, you trust the courts, you trust the police, you trust the army, you trust those institutions, it almost facilitates a situation where we start becoming a little bit more trusting of each other. But in a context where we distrust our institutions, our levels of distrust remain high. And Thando actually touched upon, I think, quite an important element of that was when I wrote it down. I did. On the world champions. And you mentioned, we are 4 times the world champions, but where's our national pride? On that. So, you know, we had this short-lived moment of national pride, of coming together, of celebrating, and now we go back to realities. And I think for me, it brought up a question that I just noted down for myself. What makes me proud to be South African? Wow. And I think that is actually where we need to start moving towards. It's finding that national pride. And it is important. And I'm going to end off on this note because I'm an overachiever, so I'm trying to be the best timekeeper I can. There's important lessons that we should learn from the July 2021 violence. And one of the most important lessons that violence has taught us is how volatile identity constructs can become for political expediency. You know, and that is for me where national pride, what makes me proud to be South African, becomes quite important.
I wonder what makes me proud to be South African. Dr. Boy, I was quite fascinated with your reflections on the nobility of the cause of the Springbok team. And I think it was reflected even in the commentary. You see, I've been following sport, guys. I even know the commentary. Like, I've been following this. And it's reflected even in the commentary of Usia Kolisi after the match when he speaks on the expectations that they said they didn't know the Springboks. Now they know us. And the nobility represented in his understanding as a captain of the country he comes from, and therefore the weight that he and his team were carrying to bring that win home, and the knowledge of what that would mean for us as South Africans, even if it was just for a moment. And so I'm wondering, how do we harness this honesty within our leadership currently? And I think we've been in a lot of discussions where we've spoken about corruption as something that is destroying our nation. So what do we do to make our leaders more honest?
Thank you, Program Director. It is such a complex question to respond to, because here you are talking about leaders who looked at themselves as messiahs, political. All right. Now here you are referring to leaders who looked at themselves as political messiahs, and anything that comes out of their thinking is not the issue. You have to belong, you have to be part of that. And another thing that I think it has been a serious mistake of all the South African or the South African nation is when they actually outsourced, everything, to the political leaders. We have outsourced our power, to control our own country. We have outsourced the power to make decisions. We have outsourced the power to own the decision. So at some point, you will never at any point in time get honest leaders. Because we have given them, a free ticket to Hollywood. And that is why we are still facing these challenges. The only time when they become accountable, honest, is when we are making them to be more accountable. How do we do that? How do we do that? We need to reclaim our power, divine power, if you may put it like that, to make decisions and to own decisions. Perhaps I've made my point. Thank you.
Okay. In the true spirit of the Herald Community Dialogue, it's now time for the community to dialogue. I am going to open up the Q&A session. I ask that when you stand up, please introduce yourself, and also please keep your comments and your questions brief so that we can allow our panel enough time to respond. I'm sure we still want to hear from them. So I'll take a round of hands. 4 hands to begin with. 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. All right. Chief?
Well, and normally I must say key, because it's the word number 1 in my language, key. So not one, two. Okay, my name is Paramount Chief Karep. I'm from the Katskorana Royal House. I think if I listen to what everybody has said here, I think I have to call or say the World Cup was for me a joy of tears, of, may I say, joy with tears, or maybe I can say joy and tears, because what I want to say is I'm not a watch. I don't watch rugby normally. I'm a cricket fan. And for me, I was very disappointed when South Africa lost to fight for the World Cup. And it put me back to a time when we and my friends was fighting for freedom before apartheid. And there was a lot of tears because we want freedom. And we was arrested for a lot of things in our community. And I think it was tears that was flowing with that moment. But the joy had come when we can participate in the first democratic elections, when we know we're making an end to the apartheid, when we have won the elections and then we choose our late former president. What I want to say is, Mr. Dr. Boy, there's a time when I'm an artist and you are the COE of the museum. I pray for a day when we all will have celebrate when our indigenous arts and crafts also want to be part of your museum. And maybe there is. Then I want to pay a visit. But my question here is, can we bring joy to our artists as the rugby bring that unity for our global to celebrate? Can we, waiting for your email or phone call, wake up and waiting and see there's an email or phone call saying, come in and visit my office? I'm making these proud necklaces. And for my Khoisan family here, they buying it by me, they bought it by me. And I'm proud to be an artist. Global celebration, global joy. How can we as a nation, how can we as the Khoisan nation, we know our history. You don't have to tell you our history. Some people just keeping a silence about us. But really, we was part of that global celebration when the Sia Kolisi lift up that World Cup. We was part of it. And really, we want the panel to look at us as we sit here, making us part of your decisions and your celebrations to bring that unity under us and diversity so that we can also celebrate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Number 2.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Program Director. My name is Voyondo Dana, and I work at CANRAD. So my question is simple. I just want to know, how do we bridge the gap when we're talking about inequality, and how do we bridge the gap between the schools, or at a grassroots level rather? Because what we realize now is that in the schools, in the rugby teams, mostly in South Africa, your provincial rugby teams, your border, your Sharks, or whatever the case might be, the people that end up being absorbed within those teams are players that usually come from former Model C schools. And then you find that within that, you have a whole entire population of young black kids that are not part of that system. For example, there was a Craven Team Week that was released last, I don't know how many months ago it was, but if you look at the school makeup, it's your Selborne, your Dale, your Queen's College, as if that's the only schools that are in the border, number one. And number two, Prof. Steencoats, I would like you to just touch on the idea behind happiness and voter behavior, because we're going into the 2024 elections next year. And I would really like to know, because I have a concern rather, because the idea behind happiness, right, and voter behavior, because it's been proven that the happier people are, the more beneficial it is for the incumbent, right? So I'd just like you to touch on that and how sports adds on to that happiness from the nation, and whether or not it won't be dangerous for us next year if we decide to vote for the incumbent or not. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me here. I just love these dialogues. Okay, my name is Isaac Adams. I'm an engineer by profession, and it's so nice to see Tando wearing a shirt of the company that I worked for, both here in South Africa and in Japan, Isuzu. And secondly, it's also good to see that Professor here is adding color to the group. Firstly, I want to make a statement. You know, 1995, I was coming from that apartheid era, growing up into it, being subjected to a second or third grade citizen, whatever you want to call it. In 1995, and remember, I was one of those people that supported any overseas team that played against Springboks. Right? But when Nelson Mandela ran out of the tunnel with that number 6 jersey on, I said to myself, Isaac, that man, after spending 27 years in jail, right, has forgiven and support the Boks. Who the hell are you? And just there, I turned around and I became a Springbok supporter, right? And one of the biggest supporters. I think with that message also, I managed, not all, but some, got people to change their way of thinking about being the opposition supporters. Now, in the northern areas, I know, because I move around, I work here basically on a daily basis, there's like almost like a 50-50. All Blacks and Springboks, right? We need to change that. We need to change that mindset, right? Now you go to the so-called townships, and you find most of our friends there are Springbok supporters. Maybe because of Sia, I don't know, but I think that is one of the main reasons. So we need to change that mindset in the northern areas. And Madam Presenter, you know what worries me? What worries me? When you see all here, where are the other people from the other suburbs that should be here to come and see or listen to what the dialogue is all about and what unity and diversity should be? Now, I mean, I worked through that. I worked with suppliers right through South Africa and everything. Then, excuse me, sorry. Then, of course, I think it was Dr. Boy or Tando spoke about the playing field. The playing fields is not leveled. Really, people, when you compare to what our children, what the schools, right? That they got the fields that they got to play on, and compare it to Grey and all of those places. I'm telling you, people, there's a lot of work to be done, and all it requires is proper planning, proper thinking, and thinking out of the box. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Number 4.
No, thank you very much, colleagues. In the interest of time, I'll cut to the chase. On the 12th of November, I wrote a piece in the Sunday Tribune, which was titled, "Sport has the potential to bridge racial and political divide." And I was inspired by Nelson Mandela, who said, "Sport has the power to change the world." With that in mind, I have a question which cuts across all all 4 speakers. Why is it so difficult to obliterate racial divisions in South Africa? Thanks.
Sure. All right. Thank you so much. All right, so I want to invite our panelists to answer these questions. As you answer, perhaps, I think also provide your closing remarks on this conversation, because I see we are going to be out of time soon. So I am going to start with, let me go with the original order I was given, actually, this time around. No, that's not it. I'm going to start with Prof. Gotze. Prof. Steen. Sorry.
I proudly hand over the baton to my colleague, proudly thinking I'm not first. The closing remarks, but also I think in terms of answering the big question, which links into what Isaac was talking about as well as Vuyo, and so I'm going to hopefully make sense. The first thing I think we do need to look at is, again, it boils down for me to questions around equality of opportunity. So when I say equality of opportunity, very often people think, yeah, but you're talking about affirmative action and you've got all of the... That is not what equality of opportunity means. Equality of opportunity means that the playing field is a little bit more level, right? So that your former Model C schools vis-a-vis township schools vis-a-vis, everybody gets a chance to bite at the apple. That is what equality of opportunity boils down to. The problem, of course, is opportunity of equality takes money. It takes public money. And when you have a public institution, or you have institutions that are crippled by corruption, the money available to start leveling the playing field becomes less and less and less and less and less. And for me, I think it also boils into what we were talking about a bit earlier on, that we all go out and we all measure public values, public attitudes. We want to know what citizens are thinking. We are forgetting a very important, and again my favorite word, demographic in this conversation, and that is, what are our political elites thinking? What are their values? What are their motivations to do what they do? And Becky, I think for me it also ties in a little bit into your question, how can we demolish these racial divides? And I think one of the first key steps is there has to be a recommitment to good governance, and that means that public money is spent for the public good. And the public good in this instance would be, we need to start breaking down those divisions in terms of service delivery. We cannot speak of equality if you have children. I say children, my son will be matric next year. He will kill me if I call him a child. but you cannot have children writing matric exams, studying by candlelight without access to water, without sufficient food, without sufficient housing. There's no equality. There's no equality there. So there's got to be that public commitment. The second point is we also need to pay attention to the narratives of political elite and whose agenda they are advancing and for what purpose. Again, I will refer to the July 2021 violence. For me was quite a key point. And to wrap up, Vuyo. Oh, hi. Happiness and voter behavior. I don't like happiness. Not that I'm a sad, bitter person, but the term happiness in politics, it's got a specific, meaning to it, where you're looking at a benevolent dictator that's dishing out in order to try and keep the citizens happy so that they can remain in power. I think the key question is around subjective well-being. How well do you think you are doing in your life? So what is your overall life satisfaction? How satisfied are you with your personal relationships, your housing, your job, all of those, your schooling, your access to healthcare, all of those different areas. And I think our research is very much focused around questions of subjective well-being as opposed to happiness. That said, people that we have found, I've got a chapter forthcoming that I can share with you on happiness inequality in the country. It's what I looked at. So you take income inequality, but I just made it happiness inequality. People are more likely to report that they are happy. And I think that is very uniquely, talk about national pride, South African thing. Where we don't really want to say we're unhappy. Because if we say we're unhappy, so we'd much rather say we're happy. But when you start asking people how satisfied are you with your personal relationships, it kind of breaks down. So I think that happiness and voter behavior nexus is going to be quite interesting to see how political parties will start to play on that, especially considering the Messiah narrative that some political parties are advocating if you look at some political posters around saving the nation.
All right. Dr. Kairuki.
Wow, these are very challenging questions, and I think, again, they underscore the importance of this kind of a conversation, because, as I premised in my conversation, is that the unfinished business that this country is still struggling with is to continue walking this journey with the intention to make sure that every voice is heard, every community is respected, but even adding to that conversation is that communities such as the Khoisans who are sitting here are brought into decision-making process. I think it is just deliberate that there is a a political elite that decides to exclude some and to include some. And I think the call to action in this room is rallying the rest of us who are made visible to work with communities such as this one that are excluded deliberately and bring them to the fore with our voices, because that's our national project. Second thing, I think it's important to be bold enough as citizens, ordinary citizens, understanding the power we have. I love the idea of reclaiming that power, because when that power is mobilized in the right direction, just in this context of sporting, when sports done in the correct way, as we are saying in this room, is a unifier of people, it builds hope, and it inspires people to want to build a nation together. The exact opposite is true. When sport is used in the wrong way, it can divide a nation. So when we mobilize collective citizen action and be able to stand together to make sure that not only are we making political leaders accountable, we are also standing together to say we also resist those who amongst us want to fuel a rhetoric or a narrative that makes us more conscious of our differences than what we have in unity as one people. Because truth be told, it's not just political parties or politicians who bring these kinds of narrative that make us believe we are not equal enough. There are people who live with us in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our workspaces, that constantly also remind us we are weak, powerless, and unable to do what we need to do together as a collective. I want to believe that we can be able to rise above that. But it also requires that we have, as one of our colleagues just said now, that personal attitude change. Can I be able to be in the same room with a person that I think is different from me? Can you imagine how, and when we unpack that kind of discomfort, it starts building a new social fabric for ourselves. And it's a pity that we're talking these kind of things 30 years later, post the new dawn. We would have expected we have moved a few stages up that ladder. But we're still dealing with it. And that's why I still call it the unfinished business, because we might quickly move on in the aspiration of the kind of a nation we want to co-create, but forget that there is still things that we have not dealt with comfortably. And that is, can we be in the same room and tolerate difference? Thank you.
Tando.
Thank you. Oh, Tando, all right.
Thank you. I think I'll start with the gentleman that spoke about the schools. I think predominantly that's the border region in terms of the schools that he mentioned. It has to be noted that the school sports association, especially rugby, sort of run their own. And therefore, you know, when they run or you run with your own people, you'll always just be so selective and always want the soft landing. So in terms of those schools continuously, you know, getting the best seat in the house, is that when you go to the locations, whether it's Zwelicha, Ginsberg, and so forth, is that Itishara Zabo, their teachers, they are not punting more for their kids. I think back in the days, you had teachers that took us to trials at schools, and they would really make sure that there's fairness. Instead, what happens now is the few schools that you mentioned will get the, you know, will get the front seats because they offer the venue. For trials, they give out everything because they know that they would love their kids to play Cravenwick, which is the best high school competition for the best schoolboys. And that also gives those schoolboys an opportunity to be awarded with SA School Scholars, with EPDs, you know, and so forth. So, and also schools are just an affiliate to SARU. So they still make their own decisions. And I think that's just teachers being teachers. And the only way that you can only empower the previously disadvantaged school is to have hubs. I think in terms of when you have hubs, you sort of create a selection team from that hub that will go stronger without being diluted, or you take one player from Zondelelo to, and you mix them with players that know each other, that play for Gray, Pearson. I mean, that player will be lost. And that's the issue, is that how best can you create those opportunities? Back in the days, you had what you call academy teams that sort of looked at players that didn't get a fair opportunity, but they can still prove themselves. And that sort of went off because development tournaments and those tournaments were sort of killed at a stage. I'm happy that they're coming back, or they came back only this year where you had academy weeks. So I'm hoping that, that could be changed, but it has to be changed from a teacher's perspective in terms of that. And I think also there's a speaker that spoke about fields in the northern areas. And I so happened that I went to the northern areas. So that's where I learned to play the game. But I have to say, corporate needs to be seen more, I think, across the spectrum. Because if you look at government, Department of Sports, they've amalgamated with arts and culture. They have lesser budget. So every time you go and you look and you have bigger ideas and better ideas that could sort of upskill a lot of people, there's never funding. And it's just that accessing of that funding. And the lottery is not going to be enough because it's got certain stages. And I think also, I mean, Galvin Grounds is a typical example where all sports were played at Galvin Grounds, enough sports for everyone to participate, because some of the schools were not built to have the infrastructure of the schooling. So we also need some sort of a big sporting center where government, aligned with corporate, can build this huge sports facility for all our communities. I know I'm just dreaming, but I mean, how best can we fix the situation? Because it will take years and years for schools, especially in the townships and the colored areas, to have the facilities. I mean, if you go to Pearson, they've got a top-notch high-performance center. That's a high school. You'll never find that in any location or in any colored area, a school with that amount of high-performance machinery. So therefore, I'm trying to say is that maybe government is tired, but they don't know what to do with it. I think despite sport bringing, the most relief, unity, cups and what have you, it's still not seen as something that really can drive the South African narrative, where we all come together and align for one common purpose. And that purpose, despite you being ambitious, will always be not given the full attention, and the strategy and the vision, we don't share the same from a government perspective, because then they'll tell you that houses needs to be built, rightfully so, but sport is the one that really puts us on the map. But so in so saying, I would say, corporate, how best we can align corporate government to build those facilities, because I think our kids are getting more into drugs. They're getting into wrong things because actually there's no proper place to keep them. I mean, in PE, you have in the northern areas, like I said earlier, you have the Galvin track and you have the Galvin grounds just opposite. And that still at least give those kids opportunity to go and train every Wednesday. But if you go to the township, you barely find something similar to that. And that maybe a solution needs to be found. But I'm also of the view that I think the recruitment drive is also in some way lacking. And there I'm speaking from high performance departments. And I mean, it just needs more people that can really work to see it comes through. I mean, we have in the Eastern Cape, there's 4 big universities, but not one of them are in the Varsity Cup. And that's the biggest competition of the Varsity Cup. All of them now are playing in the Shield. So therefore, meaning that more youngsters are going to leave the province because they want to play in the Varsity Cup. They want to be noticed. But we've got to find a common ground and have more of this discussion on how best we can keep our own and how best we can get, the university in Madibas, you can get Wushu, Forte, try and make sure that they play in those top competition structures because the opportunity is there, but it's just that in terms of personnel, the personnel we're losing at a fast pace. And those are the solutions that we've got to find, because if we don't find them, Eastern Cape will just be places where people just come and take players and they leave with it, and then we've got nothing to show. So I think if we're looking at something of that similar, then it's the recruitment drive, but also put heads together and come up with a common purpose of what's our vision, where do we sort of think strategically we can get this right again and make sure that we become the real hub of this sport, which is rugby in this instance, but as well in football. So that's my take on the issues and some of the questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tando. To end off our sermon, Dr. Boy.
Thank you. Yes, it is. This is a very difficult question, especially when you are talking about to what extent are we sort of creating perhaps a non-racial South Africa, obliterate racial divisions in South Africa. It's quite difficult. It's a difficult question. I would say why I'm saying that. As long as black African people, coloreds, and all that are not part of the economic mainstream, we are so excluded. There will never be any racial division, call it unity in this country. And in this country, I want to believe that there is another form of oppression, what I refer to as an oppression of a special type. What is that oppression of special type? It is when our own people are excluded from the economic mainstream, taking, meaningful participation in cultural issues and sport issues. You are only remembered when there is a Freedom Day. Where are they? We want the Khoisans to dance here. Where are they? We want them to sing. Huh? We are only remembered then. Huh? Why you cannot have such platforms forever and forever? And it's something else to have those platforms. You don't even fund them. What is the role of the private sector? When are they coming to the game? I'm talking about your Isuzus. I'm talking about your Toyota here. I'm talking about your VW here. At what point are they coming to the party? They only come to the party when they want to promote their products, using us. And that should come to an end. It should come to an end. And another thing, which is so, we will never have unity in this country as long as this government continues to make us to depend on 350 rents. Those grants. We will never have that kind of a unity. Because you continue creating classes. You continue creating inequality. For instance, perhaps, Mr. Manana, you should know this. My son, Liema Lisa, you go to his videos. I sent him to, last time, I sent him to Queen's College. Grade 6, grade 8 up to the last grade. He played. He was the best, one of the best players there of rugby. And then when I said, Liama, come, let's go home. Village in Alice. That I can't play here. And I said, why? Look, there are potholes all over here. Now, as long as you don't provide proper facilities and infrastructure, we will continue having this very same problem. So we need to stand up, and that is why I'm saying, let us stop to outsource our power. Let us stand up And now I was here on the 14th and the 15th last week. I was here, same room. And I was listening to the Khoisan people saying that we are excluded. It is high time to stop crying and to stand up and fight and confront. If we have leaders in the form of our chiefs, let our chiefs stand up and no more crying and mourning about exclusion, but demand to be excluded and to participate. You don't have to go and beg for that. You don't have to. You have to stand up and fight for it because it is your right. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you all. My part of the program has concluded, and I'm going to hand over to a great man, allegedly by the name of Professor Mgomezulu, who is going to deliver our vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm mindful of the fact that we are running out of time. I prepared a 10-page speech, so I'll carry it to 5 pages. No, I'm kidding. No, I was well aware that I'm not going to speak today. My job is a very simple one, that is to thank all of you who came here. Starting with the facilitator. Let's give the facilitator a round of applause, please. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we have our colleagues from the Herald. There is one of our sisters from there. We really appreciate the working relationship that we have had for the whole year. For those who don't know, this kind of a dialogue happens 4 times a year, which means 2 times a semester or 1 time a quarter. So this one is our very last one. So you came to the last one, so you made history. I would also like to extend our sincere gratitude to all our speakers. That is the one coming from DDP, Dr. Karaoke, and then of course Prof. Kutse from the HSRC, and then Dr. Boy from the Nelson Mandela Museum, and then also our brother Mr. Manana from the Blue Boards. Thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. I would then also like to take this opportunity to thank the Conrad staff and also the Herald staff. We could not have all of these events if they were not there. So they've done a sterling job in making sure that all these events became a reality. Thank you very much to all the staff in both institutions. Thank you all. Then I would also like to indicate that as Conrad, we have signed MOUs with both DDP and the Nelson Mandela Museum, and then we have also informally started discussions with the HSRC. Thank you very much, colleagues. Yeah, because our idea basically is to make Conrad visible to the communities. That's why we have events here, and then we have events in communities. Our idea is to do away with the tag of institutions of higher learning being referred to as ivory towers. That's what we're trying to obliterate. With your support, we'll be able to do that. And then I would also like to indicate that we've had other events with CAS. This is a German funding agency, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. They've been part of our events. We've had 2 this year, and we're hoping that we'll have more next year. They were not part of this event, but then they've assisted in other events. And because this is the last event, I felt it's important to thank them as well. And then as I'm about, thank you. Yeah, as I'm about to end, I would also like to indicate that our stakeholders include people who are unsung heroes and heroines. And these are our service providers. Starting with my big brother here, Comrade Marco. He has been with us throughout. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. These are the people who make sure that even if we have people joining us virtually, they make things happen. Like you saw, there was no way we would have been able to get Mr. Manana if it wasn't for this the service that we received. So thank you for that. And the roving mics that make us audible, they also come handy when we bring them on board. Then the other stakeholder, of course, are those who provide catering. because they say you must feed the nation. You mustn't starve the body that works. So we appreciate the work that they've been doing, and they will continue to do that going forward. And we also want to thank our administrators in all our institutions, the Herald, the Conrad, DDP, Nelson Mandela Museum, HSRC, because these are the people who make things happen. In terms of logistics, they do organize our flights, they organize everything. Without them, we won't be able to have these events. So let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. And then finally, you, ladies and gentlemen, you are our best shot, because we cannot have an event and talk to ourselves. So we need the audience, whether you come in person or virtually. Let's give ourselves a round of applause, please. Thank you very much. And then as I conclude, we have had staff from Conrad facilitating our events. One of them is in Tlax. We call her in Tlax. There's Ntlakanepo. She has done a sterling job throughout the year. The second one is my son. I call him my son, Mr. Ndotana here, Vuyo Ndotana. And then the other one who is not here is Mnoto. These are the people who have been facilitating our events from Conrad, and there are other colleagues from the institution, and some of them we got through our colleagues from the Herald. All of them have done a sterling job. With those few, ladies and gentlemen, I would say ngiyabonga, enkosi, asante sana, ndolibuwa, baya danke. Thank you.